I guess they're going to get me mixed up with this. They'll get me mixed up with this person. I have to tell them I'm not that person. You're more... Yeah. Yes.
We need to move out of the way. Well, we need to move out of the way.
I'm going to fly to the table. No. Anything has to happen, it's happened to me. Which is fine to go with it. Literally.
Good morning. I'd like to welcome each and every one of you to the panel. We're starting off this morning with the Diversity Week with a panel on politics and civil discourse. It's probably escaped no one's attention here in the room that we live in interesting times. Having lived a good part of the last 70 years, I can tell you that the times do really seem to be interesting at this point. We run into some things that are new about this time. For example, our ability to exchange information, to gather information. That's put us in a place that has been very, very different than places that we were previous to the last 15 or 20 years. Now, because of this, one of the things that has really sprung from all those changes in the way in which we handle information and share information is that we are now struggling a little bit with how it is that we talk to each other about a range of different kinds of topics. And so our panel today draws on people with different kinds of expertise to discuss the issue about how it is that we are addressing each other on topics that are important for public discourse, but then also to gather your views about how it is that you all express yourself on the issues of the day. Because ultimately, if we don't work well together, then the difficulties that would spring from that would be obvious. So I'm going to begin, first of all, by introducing our panelists. And we have a very distinguished group of people who are going to be speaking here today. I'm going to start off with the person who is on your right. Yes, your left, I'm sorry. Your left, my right. And that's Brittany Tarwater. Brittany is an alum of both the Communication Studies program as well as the Journalism and Electronic Media program. She is a news anchor for WVLT. She's an award-winning news anchor. And it turns out that when she was here, she was also a 7-time All-American involving swimming and diving. So we're really fortunate to have Brittany here with us today. Casey Williams is to Brittany's left, your right. And Casey is the Blount County Director of Libraries. She is a graduate of Southern Miss University. She's held these kinds of positions in other places also across the globe. I was talking with her earlier. She actually had a 2-year stint with the libraries on the Cayman Islands. So for any of you all who have ever been to the Cayman Islands, you know it's a little bit different than the way things operate here in East Tennessee. Next to her we have Savanna Jacoby. Savanna is a journalism and electronic media senior, and she's also a student assistant on campus, so she wears a couple of different hats. And next to Savanna is Dr. Mera. He is a professor in the School of Information Sciences and has a number of interesting qualifications for this panel, not the least of which is that he is a recently naturalized United States citizen. So we have a group of people who are going to be sharing with you their views on some of the topics of the day. And I thought it might be really helpful to start off with a video that might give us a little bit of a sense of maybe how we are framing things in the public these days.
Two presidential candidates. You got Trump, he's a racist. You got Hillary Clinton, she's a criminal. I can't believe this. Just keep it inside. Learn how to
Christy, Ted, and Patrick.
Hey guys, how are y'all doing?
Well, I've got a lot of
Grab a
plays
seat.
Jacob's on the program. And I'll bring that back in a couple of minutes here.
Did you hear the news here that on
Also,
campus they're
one
letting
show-
faculty and staff allow them to carry concealed weapons?
Yeah, and I think that's a big mistake. No one should have a gun unless they're the police or the military defending our country. Think of all the people who have died from illegal gun use. Personally, I hate guns.
Well, according to the U.S. Constitution, I have a right to bear arms. It protect myself and my family.
Well, when the forefathers wrote the Second Amendment, they did not know about today's firearms. And in addition, of all the countries in the world, the United States has the highest rating of shootings from guns.
Shoot, I ain't never given up my right to bear arms to protect myself and my family.
Your choice.
A lot of issues like guns, like immigration, like the political discourse we have around political parties these days, that make things a real challenge to discuss. Brittany probably has as big a challenge as anyone sitting in this room because she has to report on those topics that oftentimes are really problematic in the minds of folks. So we're going to kind of go on and ask each one of the participants here what they're thinking about this, but how do we discuss difficult issues in public? And for reporters, how do we go about covering those difficult topics?
Well, covering topics like this has really changed even in the time that I've been a reporter. And a lot of that has changed, I think, from social media, which has provided access not only to leaders and celebrities and pretty much anyone you want to reach is on Twitter. But it's also given a voice to people who have not previously had a place to express their opinions and their emotions about particularly controversial subjects. And it's a lot easier to tweet something than it is to put your face on something. So the way that we've been able to cover issues that have really stirred a lot of hot debate has changed. And we've integrated social media, we've integrated different platforms into the way that we cover it. But our job really in local news is to present an issue and present reaction. So we would be able to, I don't know your name, but Chris would be able to present the issue of faculty, staff carrying guns on campus, and then we'd be able to talk to Savanna about why she's against it, and then Anthony about why he's for it. So our job in local news is not to have an opinion. And this is really different. The media has lately been blanketed as the media. We've all kind of been grouped into one platform or one group, but it's very, very different on local news than it is on cable news. So that's something that we can talk about a little bit later, but our job in local media is to present an issue and to present both sides of a controversial issue. So both reactions and an issue, and then let you decide where it is that you stand. Of course, presenting that the topic would have to come with a lot of information and background, so that people are able to make their own decisions.
Libraries serve as a resource for society, where they go to get information in support of the position that they may be holding. How is this affecting people who are consumers of library materials and library information?
Well, I think, I'm in the, what's the real story? What are the facts? What's the context? Because often we look at things today, information particularly, outside of the context from which it was developed. And I don't think you can do that and come away with the true intent, especially when you're looking at like the Constitution or the Bill of Rights. But people that are really good users of information will ask questions. They'll ask them on Facebook, which is interesting. I have friends and family members that are very well educated that will reply to comments on Facebook with facts and links and issues. But what they get back is not an educated discourse, but it then becomes an angry free-for-all name calling. So where's the median in that? How can we use the tools we've got? Because social media is an excellent tool, it gives voice. But how can we learn to do it in a manner that is real discourse, a sharing of both opinions, but also working towards a solution? Because right now, if we can't meet in the middle, there aren't going to be solutions. We're just going to get more and more polarized. And so, yes, I think libraries have a major role in that. We struggle to figure out how best to meet that, but still walk. I mean, we're political too. My position, even though I'm hired, is very political. I serve county government, 2 city governments, and all the constituents in my community, and I'm accountable to them. So I have to be very neutral all the time, but yet still provide information. Case in point, we had a book display, not in Blount County, but in a different library during a presidential election, materials on all the candidates. Well, most of the materials on one particular candidate were checked out. And I had a patron that was extremely upset because we were only representing one side. And that wasn't the case. The side that was out was what people were interested in reading, and we had limited resources. So it's that kind of snap judgment. Now, if that had happened today, it had been all over the library's social media. People would have posted on Google, you know, that we did this or we didn't do that. So with that kind of openness and the ability, there should also be a responsibility and consequences. We have freedom of speech, but we don't have freedom of consequences from freedom of speech. So think about that.
Students oftentimes are an overlooked group when it comes to public discussions. In fact, recent polls from the Pew Center suggest that actually many students are at this point, or many people in your age group or cohort, are turned off by political parties and consider themselves to be more independent. How is the discussion among people in your generation different, perhaps, than the discussion among other generations about public discourse?
I think it's a touchy topic, and especially coming from my point as a student journalist, we also have that same ability to display students' opinions, because a lot of the stories I'm working on now through college involve majority of students. And I think the perfect example with this is that I did a gun rights story last semester where I had a struggle to display both sides, and I had the police point of view, UTPD, about how faculty and staff are able to carry. And then I had a student who was of age and had her gun carry permit but was not able to carry on campus. Her point of view of feeling uncomfortable and not safe in some types of environments. And I think, just as Brittany mentioned, it is our right, even as a student journalist, it is our duty to display, even on a college campus, how people feel in these types of situations. And once you piece the story together, you see perfectly from each side of you where you're coming from. And especially in this climate, I think we find it hard to differentiate some types of media from commentary. And so you see more commentary pieces on cable news, which is very, very opinionated. But then you see on those same cable news channels that some shows can be more just fact. And it's hard for people of our age to understand, to differentiate that media. But local news is, I would say, very, very, very bipartisan. And of course, student media as well. We can't really pick a side. And so I find it hard, I find it funny when students do say they find local news to be partisan, because I don't see at all how they could see that, because it's hard to differentiate the medias now due to social media.
Well, Professor Mary, you've had, because of your life experience, the opportunity to witness civic discourse in different cultures. So how do you view the way we are discussing issues of importance, whether it be gun control or immigration or any other hot-button issues right now?
Yes, my work is on social justice for minority and underserved populations, and I've had a chance to work with various underserved groups, including sexual minorities, racial ethnic groups, and rural populations. And so in those settings, coming in from a person from India, my accent sounds different. I'm an openly out gay person. So how have I been able to negotiate those realities and still be able to work with different constituencies in the rural areas, small businesses, rural librarians, and others, and address some of these matters of political debate that we are finding? And recently, of course, in the aftermath of the 2016 presidential election, we've seen that the divides have become even more wider. And there is, within the political climate that we find, the message that I teach to and engage with my students are three aspects there. First of all is information literacy. Where is the information? How do we base our arguments and aspects of discussion based on evidence? What is the source, the authoritative sources where the evidence is coming from in order to make our claims and our opinions and our various viewpoints related to that? The second aspect is related with information fluency, that evaluating that information as evidence from its different types of sources, the pros and cons to what we are finding there. How do you relate it to what my colleague Casey mentioned, the aspect of context, the point of view where it's coming from, who is it coming from, what is the message and the agenda of that particular entity, group, individual, organization who is representing that point. And that contextual aspect is very important to recognize when we're hearing someone, especially in social media and other venues too. And the third angle is information advocacy, which is related with activism and advocacy, and all our younger generations are so strongly immersed and involved in it. But there's a certain aspect, there's a certain responsibility in that activism and advocacy that we have to recognize. And that is related with the dimension of what is the common ground. In the activism and the advocacy that we're involved in, all our different viewpoints, how can we shape discourse, get more people agreeing to our point of view? What is the common ground there? What is the common understanding where we are in terms of moving forward, in terms of doing something as solutions to the issues that might be at hand? So those are the three constructs that I kind of relate to when I'm looking at various political matters and what one is finding in the social media. Everybody has a point of view. Everybody feels entitled to say whatever they want to say. But I try and remind myself and my students when I'm talking about these in some of my diversity courses, the aspect of evidence, aspect of context, and then what is the common ground? What is the solution? What are we coming towards in terms of action when one means? What can we do about it? In spite of all our differences that exist. So that's how I kind of respond to some of those aspects.
As we go forward, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to raise your hand. One of the things that has always been of interest to me is that why is this happening? Why is this happening now? Again, having lived through a good part of the last 70 years, all of us, for those who are on my point of the path, all of those folks have ended up seeing highly contested presidential campaigns or hotly contested Senate campaigns, or issues where people were divided on a topic. But yet our tribalism now seems to be more pronounced than it has been in the lifetime of, certainly my lifetime. So we don't want to turn to our panelists in no particular order. What's causing this tribalism now? And one way to maybe think about this and frame it, human beings can't help but think about other people in terms of categories. If I ask you to describe a friend, you would probably say something like, he is, or she is, or this person's a Southerner, or this person is going to the University of Alabama. It's hard for us to think about people outside of categories, but that has always been present with us. So what's changed now? Why is it that tribalism now seems to be such a hotter issue than it has been in the past? In no particular order, any one of the panelists or folks in the audience want to take a stab at that. Casey?
Well, I think our tribes are bigger because of social media. And you can find somebody that shares your view on any subject through that. But you can't always have the kind of context, again, that you need to weigh and measure what you're hearing and talking about. Also, I think it might have to do with a greater awareness of issues that impact our sense of belonging. You know, we need that. We need a sense of belonging. Family, friends, shared experiences. If they're not positive, then we go where it is.
And I would agree. I think that social media, especially coming from our generation, has been a huge part of why people are so easy to pick sides, especially students, because I mean, we fall so easy, I feel, to peer pressure. And so if you think one way, it's so easy to find someone that agrees with everything that you believe in, and it's easy for y'all to just kind of group together and like start this tribe, as you would say. And I think that's why we're so divided and there is no middle ground. I think it's different in some cases on college campuses, because in my case, I've seen a lot of people have been able to have a consensus of like a moderate argument and like come to an understanding. But in many cases, what we see on social media is just the two sides, and that's why we are where we are now.
Conflict's not bad. Conflict's good. Having different sides of an opinion, that's good. But being able to weigh and measure to come to a common place for the good of the majority, which is how we work here, that's what we're losing. It's you're right, you're wrong, I'm right, and we have to do it my way, because my way is the only way. So how do we get past that?
And I think it's easy to create an enemy out of someone who doesn't share your viewpoint, and it's easy to write off whatever you don't like or you don't believe as fake news, which is a really funny term that we have nowadays. But I think that the idea, there is fake news out there, and a lot of it is shared easily through social media, but to deem everything that we don't agree with as fake news is causing chaos, and it's undermining the integrity of journalists, and it's undermining democracy. So I think it's really dangerous and it's really scary. And I'll share an example. Over the summer, President Trump was in Nashville stopping for Marsha Blackburn, and I went to cover that event, and I've been in a lot of hostile situations as a journalist that have been violent and dangerous. But I've never been afraid to be a journalist like I was that day. And these people didn't know me. They didn't know who I represented. They didn't know if I was with a local news station, if I was with a cable news station, and they were just the people who were out in line for hours waiting to get inside. So it's very, very scary and very hostile. And then inside, again, the way that these events are set up is inside of an arena where the stage for the speakers is on one end, and then there's a pit essentially for the journalists on the other end, and then people can be in like a basketball arena. And so here we are, and again, this is a group of journalists who come from cable news networks, both sides of the aisle, who come from local stations all across the state. And the way that we were encouraged to be treated by our leaders at the highest level was very, very scary, to the point where things were thrown at us, things were shouted at us, gestures made at us all night, and rallied by the people on stage, a group of people on stage. And again, didn't know who we were, didn't know who we represented, but we were the media, so therefore we were fake news. So I think that there's a really polarizing nature right now that comes from different levels of our political leaders that's very, very scary, and trickles down to forming enemies, and that's a much easier voice to be had on social media. So I think it all boils down to access to information, access to a voice, and access to leaders and people who you can either hate openly or get behind openly.
I would further add to that, of course, that as I touched upon, the aspect of entitlement is there, that each one of us, thanks to social media, feels and thinks that we have a right to say whatever we want to do. But what's missing there is the implications and the consequences. We don't have recognize what are the consequences about it. So we are reacting without thinking, reflecting, and then responding to that. And we don't have any role models. Our politicians are taking the lead in those aspects of dispersing information, whether it's based on evidence or not, but it's a way to rile up their constituencies. And so that's kind of further deepening the divides in terms of the politicians are not having any consequences to face. They are getting their vote banks, and the news media is covering some of those aspects. So it's churning into the wheels of capitalism in the aspects of what the politicians are saying and the news media is reporting, and they are getting more readers and consumers of information through there. So it is the role of our younger generation to be critical about that, to reflect on that and be critical about that nexus that we are finding between the politicians and the news media. And of course, it's a business of the news to cover that. But then the politicians are feeding into that. And so and of course using Twitters and tweets and Facebooks and our social media avenues to do that. Our politicians are taking the lead. So where is the role models? Where are if our politicians are behaving that way, why isn't everybody else entitled to behave that way? Because they are not facing any consequences about those matters. So it is our role as information providers, as educators, as the newer generations to be aware and critical and not fall into that vicious aspects of consumerism and other aspects there. Yes.
We have a question.
Yeah, my name's Tony Gunn. I'm a journalism student here. As far as like journalism and writing goes, where do we stand as journalists on the activism side? Because I know, like you said, you don't want to be too opinionated, but how much should we be involved in activism, standing up for not only what we believe in, but making sure that the most information is out?
That's a great question, but standing up for what you believe in is a different issue. Unless you want to be a columnist. But if there's an issue that you care about, it is your job to bring that issue to light and then provide as much information as you can on both sides of that issue and then let people decide. So your job is to put as much of it out there as you can and let people be informed and educated, and then it's up to them to make a decision. But if you have something that you care about, then shed light. But your opinion is not involved in that story.
There's a big difference between selling news and telling a story. Big difference. We have a lot of selling the news and not as much telling the story. In fact, I think my personal opinion is that it's very important that local news be locally owned, locally managed, and that local news is where the best information in the context of the community can come from. And that's kind of not what's happening. We see our local newspapers being bought out by bigger and bigger conglomerates. When that happens, local news tends to fall by the wayside. How many of you use social media, use different platforms, but you use them the same way? You follow the same people on Twitter that you do on Facebook, that you do on Instagram. Does everybody do that or no? Okay. Think about how you can use those platforms differently. For instance, I don't have time to read the news, but it's very important that I keep up with the news. I use Twitter for that, okay? And I use Twitter for context. I don't just follow the Daily Times or the local TV stations or the Knox News Sentinel. I also follow the Washington Post, the New York Times, Al Jazeera, BBC, Reuters, Bloomberg. I have a list. So let's say, like for instance, what was in the news yesterday, the resignation of Rosenstein. Okay, he didn't resign. But for about an hour, if you followed Twitter and you saw the news releases, it became obvious very quickly who didn't have the information that was right. So you could do it at a glance. So, I mean, think about your social media platforms. Think about you and how you filter and interact with information, and use your platforms to help you create a balanced sense of what is actually happening, what the two sides are. So you can begin to discover the middle, because we all have to create our own filters, right? And our reaction to a lot of what we're seeing and hearing is strong emotion. How many of you have read something on social media or on Twitter or in the news that's just made you furious in the past week? You're like, what? Okay, so when you have that kind of strong emotion, what is your next response?
Hopefully to throw your phone down or step away from the keyboard.
Well, but I mean, the first thing you say is, I'm not, right? Your first response to that strong emotion is to go the opposite direction, right? So I would challenge you, next time you have a strong emotion, think, why does that hit you so hard? Ask yourself why a few times, and then think about, is your response how to solve it? And if it's not, how can you solve it? How can you be part of that solution? I think if we can all start thinking in terms of that, we'll begin to find a place where we can meet in the middle on some of these hot button issues. Question your responses.
This whole separation and tribal mentality, I wonder if it's because we have license now to even have that opportunity to talk about it. We didn't talk about any of this stuff when I was in school back many years ago. It wasn't permitted, it wasn't accepted, it definitely wasn't going to get printed anywhere. Now today, we have that, so we're kind of going through growing pains possibly.
Yeah.
How are we going to deal with all this new information from so many, and once you get a little taste of being able to be recognized, I can see where that would expand even further.
That's where ethics and responsibility come into play. I mean, there'll be a point where, and it's already starting, where people are held accountable. You can't libel and slander. It's against the law. And people have had enough. They don't like the lies or the innuendos. They're going to start using the court system. And I think classes in high school and universities will begin to teach the ethics that go along with being able to state your opinion. I mean, it's still new. What do you think?
That's great. And it just, this is a little bit of a slanted group, but just because we're all involved in UT, but like, who hates University of Florida? Who hates the Gators? Who hates Bama? Yeah, who hates Georgia? We all do. And so even if we don't all love Tennessee, we're all bonded in the fact that we hate other groups, which I think is something that we're also seeing in politics. So it gets to be really dicey. You know a lot about this. You've written some books on this. So it gets to be really dicey. But I think at the local level, as far as news goes, it just becomes even more important when there is such an untrustworthiness in media that it's even more important at the local level for us to be thorough and trustworthy and accurate and informed. So I think the responsibility to put out correct information is just growing and growing and growing.
But that does not supersede the responsibility of each one of you to ask questions and find out the truth. You can't put the responsibility for what you know and don't know and understand on a newspaper. You have to own it.
I want to ask a question of the folks in the audience. For how many of you all is just this blah, 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 and I've completely tuned out what is happening as far as public discourse on topics? Or is this something that you are continuing to pursue information about? You think, I really want to know more about what is being said and understand what's being said? Or is it really just blah, blah, blah?
It's okay to say blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
It's all right.
I think for me, it's something that's really kind of interesting to get a grasp on, because I've really kind of been watching something that's really been interesting to me is watching social media and the way that people have conversations about controversial topics on social media. And so I think that's something that I really am trying to like get a better grasp on, because my sister is she's a fantastic social justice advocate. And so she loves to really dive into social media things, because where we're from, like it's kind of a more closed-minded place or area. So she really likes to engage in like very educational conversation. So how do you all feel is like the best way to begin that conversation with someone who maybe just like probably totally doesn't want to see the other side?
Can you change it? Probably not. So it's the relationship with the person that's more important than the opinion, right? And I struggle with it because I have a family that feels differently than I do politically, and I have a good friend that is a Facebook friend. I often don't reply and hide post. That's my choice of filtering, because I am not going to change her mind, even though I am sure that her facts are messed up, and I am certainly not going to change the mind of my daddy, and there's a respect issue there. So that's just, I don't engage there.
I think that's the magic word. I'll go ahead, obviously.
I also think that a lot of our classes now, depending on your exact major, have kind of focused in a little bit more on ethics. I mean, personally, me as a journalism major, I know a lot of my professors have hit more here in just the past year on ethics, and where, and as a journalist, I don't think it's really our place to dive into responding to people that comment on our types of posts. Depending on how you are involved, I guess it's really more of your opinion on how you want to get involved. I think as a journalist, if you want to further the question, you ask, you know, why are you what questions do you have? Like, why do you feel this way? And that gives you more information, especially as a student too. If you want to dive into these things, you want to know why. So you want to hit at the question or the response that they're saying. You want to ask, why do they feel this way? What made them feel this way? And then from there, you create your own story, if that makes sense.
I would kind of jump on that one to remind each other our basic humanity. I mean, it's coming from, and relating to the three topics that I mentioned first: information literacy, fluency, and information advocacy. Reminding people that it's an opinion that is emerging from a particular socio-cultural information gathering process. And so, and then of course, recognizing that it's an opinion that's been informed from where we might have developed that opinion from, and helping that person recognize the nuances of the journey there might help resonate the aspect of that humanity, and help them reflect on that journey. That might help in addressing some different viewpoints that we might have. I wanted to come back to the point that our gentleman there brought up about journalism and activism, and we have encountered that in our information professions too, including the librarians, that we have to have a neutral stance, we have to be passive receptors of the dynamics that is happening in unfolding in our communities. And our viewpoint has been, at least from the professional level, that our role is to provide balanced perspectives, different viewpoints in there. But I take that further, and I have challenged some of the elements in the historical aspects of passive and neutral stance. And I talk about that even in the role of the journalism, in terms of where is activism and advocacy stopping, and your role as a journalism. And I've talked about that in terms of information actism, which is different from the other terms there. And actism means providing that space for a true democracy to to function effectively is by having those discourse and dialogues and arguments and different viewpoints, but in a way that is, what do we do about it? What solutions can we provide? Are we just sitting here and cribbing about it, or having different viewpoints and that aspect of entitlement? But then what do we do about it? We have to be part of the solution there, and that's where actism comes in, even in the role of the journalism there. What solutions can we provide through mediating the different viewpoints there?
One of the things that, from a public speaking point of view, and by the way, how many people in here are in public speaking? Few folks, okay. For those people who are, or if you've not yet taken public speaking, one of the things you're going to be required to do is to cite sources and determine what a credible source is. So what is a credible source these days? What do you all, when you all think about, like, I need to go find something that, at least in my mind, is going to be accurate, what is that credible source?
Peer review, scientific journal.
Okay. So for some, it's going to be maybe peer review, but how do you in your day-to-day life And if you hear stories, if you read things, if you see something on television, how do you make a decision about, well, I'm going to make a decision that this is maybe a good source, maybe not such a good source? And I'm not always sure I have an answer to that. Yes?
I guess the best you can do is just try to do as much research as you can, outside research, as you do hear something, try to go look and see if you can find that information somewhere on a credible site, or, I guess, just anywhere that you trust, try to find out as much as you can.
And just piggybacking off of her, like she said, that background information is going to be key. Like if you wanted to look up an article about how Tennessee students feel about the loss to Florida, and I wrote the article, I was at the game, you know, I'm a UT student, so I must be a real credible source for that. You know what I'm saying? So that background information is going to play like a really key role in who that you determine is credible and who's not. And directed back towards the panel, I know you talk about like activism and stuff like that. What happens when the president or somebody is attacking the journalists and attacking, you know, the media's credibility? And it's not just the media. Journalism has grown so much that we know who specific journalists are now. So now they're throwing out specific names. How do we combat that so that we won't lose our jobs and become a non-credible source because of the horse's mouth?
I think that gives you I think the magic word in all of this is respect, and to be able to disagree respectfully. And as long as you stay true to that, then you'll build a reputation that's built around respect. And it's hard not to lose sight of that, but I think that really is what it boils down to. Humanity, respect, I think they all kind of are the same theme.
Also, you know, as the manager of a large facility with 60 employees, I also have to constantly weigh what my professional responsibility is versus my personal viewpoint. Because in my job, my personal viewpoint has no reference. It is not even in the realm of consideration. My responsibility is to my community and to my staff. When we talk about gun control, libraries, you can carry in a library. So how do I keep my staff safe? How do I keep my people safe? I don't think everyone should carry a gun. That's not going to change. Everyone's going to carry a gun. So I have to go with what are my responsibilities. And I think that's the same. You know, if you are in an interview situation, you're questioning someone and they get very personal, you can bring it back around through your questioning techniques to the responsibility level, can't you? You can start asking questions that move them away from the hot button into arena of ethics or professionalism or responsibility through that technique. I work with 21 commissioners, a city council, and a small commission that are city level. So I'm involved with the government all the time. And they all are different, and they all have different opinions. They want different things. I have to believe that they took the job, they chose to run to serve their community because they wanted to make things better. What their better is may not be the same as your better. But as a department head, it's my job to know what they think is important. I need to know those things, what their agendas are, so that I can begin to serve them, because my job is service. Even if I don't agree with them, it's very difficult. It's very difficult sometimes. But I don't think it's different across any other communication sector. The same rules apply.
Yes, I would say that, responding to that question, what can we do when we are finding the top level politicians from the highest office of the land and the whole different executive, legislature and judiciary complexities that we are finding there. What can we do there is as journalists, as educators, as information professionals, as librarians, however we want to identify ourselves as information service providers, what we can do there is reveal in the telling of the story, we are telling the story, we are reporting what's being happening, what our experience is too, as you pointed out. If I'm watching the football game, it's my experience. But pointing out the complexities and the nuances of, it's like onions layers getting revealed rather than the categorization into this box or the other, because that's deepening the difference divides, revealing the different shades of issues that are there in the telling of the story, in that story by different news channel reporters, would be something to be able to then address the matters in the reality of the reporting, but pointing out that you informed public should recognize that there are these layers of issues there. And so we should not put ourselves into these little boxes in how CNN and Fox and others put themselves into. They're capitalizing into the consumption, information consumption. But ourselves as reflective, critical people, as human beings there, respecting the differences that are there in our basic humanity, we have to tell the story also with those aspects in there, rather than just one aspect, narrow vision of putting the story across. And so that might be one way to address that. Sorry.
To keep going with that, I'm Kristen, by the way, graduate student in information sciences. I think part of why we have this vitriol of discourse right now is that things like social media, Twitter, Facebook, have been so, they have us wanting quick answers. 140 characters, now 280. And you, Casey, you alluded to confirmation bias, where I think we look for something, we find it, and we're done. I've made my decision. And we don't dive into those layers, and we don't read long-form journalism. How do we get people to do that? Maybe this is a question for Brittany. I'm sure there are lots of quick comments on WVLT news stories. How do we get people to pay attention to those and listen?
When you figure that out.
One is providing that space where people can come together and have discourse that's moderated. It's a scary thing. Our Blount County Library has really started doing it more in the past couple of years, but creating a safe environment for that discourse is good.
It's a really great question, and now there is so much access to so many things. Like our news stories, if we have a minute and 45-second long news story, we have taken too much time. And so you have to be able to provide information quickly and keep people's attention. So part of when we decide content is also based on what everyone in this room is talking about, what you want to hear, because if that's not what we're providing, then you can change the channel, or you can put on Netflix, or go anywhere else that you want. So I think just for our station, it's providing the information and then allowing people to have the opportunity to click on it. Now that we have different platforms, you can put news out on social media, on Facebook, on Twitter, on our website, on the air, on stream it however you want. So I think right now our answer is just provide it. And it's accessible, right?
And taking ownership, taking ownership of the telling of the story in the limitations also that are there. We all are short memory span, and what you're pointing out, but integrating that into the narrative so that the public is aware that the writer and the journalist is conscious of the limitations of what they are writing there. Catering to the information consumerism and our need for short-term memory. Something that attracts us is like the cat, and you wave the little thing in front of it, and it goes there. You attract something else, it goes somewhere else. But we have to write that into our stories so that the public, at least it comes into the scope of conceptualizing of what they are reading there. Whether it registers or not, if they keep hearing that again and again in different, all the leaders and younger generation, if they are doing that, then it will eventually sink in.
I have a question for y'all. What do you think about commentary as a diversionary tactic? Because it happens a lot in politics, if you'll notice. There'll be a hot button, and people will get all up in arms about comments or tweets, but behind the scenes, big things are happening that are buried because there's so much focus on the emotional response of this diversionary information. So what do you think about that?
Well, we obviously know, like, there's going to be a lot of topics, you know, that they're just going to arise to cover up more things that's going to happen. And I think, relating back to what you said, just going and try to research for yourself the information that's going on behind the scenes, like not just watching CNN or Fox, like actually going out and finding more news instead of opinion pieces. And I think as young people, we don't know the difference between news and opinion. So I think that's a big deal. And I think it's going to be on you guys who are already there to help us understand that. So that's how we're going to get over that hump. And everybody knows, like, it's going to be fake and stuff that's going to be thrown out there. Like, I don't care about Trump and Roseanne Barr. You know what I'm saying? I care about what's actually happening in the office.
I want to throw out, I'm sorry.
I was just gonna, because what I was gonna say kind of leads off of that. I think a lot of people, if not the majority of people, are tired of hearing the commentary, and larger news organizations are extremely out of touch with that. And they keep, like, I've heard lots of complaints just in people that I talk to in circles that I run in of saying, you know, like, we have the U.S. funding a war in Nepal right now, but please, by all means, like, run an hour more of coverage about what Trump tweeted today.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think, and I think especially maybe like larger TV networks, especially cable TV, because they have to run all the time. I think they're kind of obsessed with the commentary, and that's not actually what their consumers want, and not actually what's entertaining them or what they want to hear, but it's kind of like a cycle that they're stuck in at this point.
All right, I want to throw out a comment and get your all's response to this. There's a lot of different ways, you know, in school we have a tendency to really value theory, so I'm sure that you all have probably heard of as much about theory courses that you ever care to hear about. But one of the theories that kind of explains a little bit about what's going on with civic discourse right now is that our culture has changed. Because if you think about what's happened during the course of your lifetime, for the first time, an African American held the presidency. For the first time in your lifetime, someone who was female ran as a presidential candidate on a major party ticket. For the first time in your lifetime, same-sex marriage became legal. For the first time in your lifetime, women can now serve in combat. So those are a lot of cultural changes. Culture provides us with some sense of place, of stability, and so one explanation about maybe why we're having this discussion is because now that we're having all these hot-button kinds of issues that probably really weren't resolved. How do you all see our culture now? Where do you see it going? Where do you see maybe some hot-button issues maybe coming up in the future? But also then how can we possibly take a culture that might be a bit fragmented right now and turn it into a culture that might be a bit more unified?
I would just have to be more transparent and just tell us what's going on, because I'm not investing any more time in it. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just not going to invest any more of my time listening to people's commentary. I need to know what's really happening. And I think if we don't do that, it's not going to work. And what good is it going to be if they're not telling us exactly what's happening? I don't care about these other people. Not when there's issues going on. Here, sorry.
I also want to bounce off that, and I think it's important to make the point that we realize that a lot of cable news obviously does have commentary pieces, and if that's not the news you want to hear, you turn it off. You find something that you do believe in, and that's what you stick to. And if that's local news, you stick with local news. If you find something like on cable news that you believe in, then it's your decision to make your opinion based off that. But I think when we talk about commentary pieces, and I do agree that they are there, you turn it off. You find something on Twitter or you find something on Facebook. You go to these different news sites, and that's the reason why we have them now, is because you do have so many outlets to go to find your news. So you find something that you do believe in and that you do trust.
As long as you have the money to subscribe, because there's no free news. not good. You can get to it free. So, you know, where is the cross there? News is a business. It has to make money. So, and then we're back around to libraries and providing access and, you know, can we keep up with providing access when social media is where you want it? How many of y'all are aware of the Pew research that was just done in the past year that smartphones are the common denominator for diversity, even poor and poor people and people that don't speak the same language are equally or they're disadvantaged in any way. They have smartphones. So that's where they're going to get their information. So we have good information if we ask questions and we have the resources to access it. So that's another big issue.
And we also then explore multiple sources. We want to look at all the viewpoints that might be there that we can get access to. And so that helps extend our understanding and conceptualization. And the second aspect is sharpening our lens of scrutiny. And so recognizing that news, politics is entertainment somewhat. It is catering to the desires of information consumption. It is catering to the desire to be entertained in some ways. And so understanding those aspects of what we are finding might also help us recognize what it is, what is the value of what we are finding, and then provide an appropriate judgment to it.
To add to that just a little bit, a lot of people are out, increasingly people only go to media sources they agree with. They don't attend or view or read things they disagree with. And so that it means that you get locked in hearing only one side or whatever of an issue. And in order for democracy to work, we really have to expand our horizons and go and listen to people that we might not agree with, take information from them that we can say, well, you know, that's a good point. But increasingly, we don't do that. We just turn the channel because we disagree with something or something. Or don't read, or we don't read. That's the other thing, is long form that you were talking about. People need that long form analysis and facts in order to get a richer understanding of what's going on. And it's a mile wide. We have an opinion that's a mile wide and a quarter of an inch deep. So we don't really know what's going on, even if we think we do, because we're information poor. We got all this information around us.
So how do we get Facebook and Twitter and all the other social media companies to change their algorithms? So we're not just getting fed sources that agree with us.
We can buy them.
Well, I mean, you have to know about them.
No, but
so
you're not going to get them to change their algorithm.
But you know what I mean? The more you follow down a path, the more you get fed links to people that are of the same mindset. And I really do think that's a big thing. I think it impacts because you become aware of information sources you didn't know existed that take you further.
Well, for one thing, don't just Google.
Well, I know it's fake.
Library,
Twitter, Facebook, you know, your accounts, it feeds you.
Our technology and our phones, are wired now to give us information that we talk about. So our circles that we're involved in, the things that we look up, everything that we do on social media is constantly being tracked, and then before we know what we're thinking, something else pops up telling us what we want to hear. So why would we need to go looking for other information when everything we want to know and hear is right in front of us? And then that creates closed-minded people, because when you have everything you want and the big groups of people that agree with you that are right there, there's no need for you to expand
there's no need
for you to expand your horizons, because it's all right there in front of you and it's what you want, you know.
So again, we're back to money.
And how we might pressurize the companies is through providing spaces for public discourse. The public discourse and the news reporters, for example, can pressurize the major social media companies to take responsibility for the type of algorithms that they might be generating, where you keep getting the advertisements that affirm your point of view. Getting them to publicly question that and change it if that problematic might be something that, and of course libraries can become one places and other places can be. As educators, it's our role to be able to provide those spaces to get you guys to put pressure in the news media channels to allow these companies to take responsibility for their actions and the limitations of the algorithms of the search engines that they have and things like that.
I can't, as a librarian, I can't combat the smartphone and how the technology works. I can't get people to ask questions because if that's where they're going, I don't interface.
But it's true.
Brandy.
It's very, very true.
I'm pretty loud.
You're pretty loud.
I think you're good. So one issue that I always have is that Facebook did not sign up to be a political news provider, right? So yet we're always looking to change their algorithms and do this and do that, and they should be tapped on the hand for what they did. Versus like, you know, CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, they signed up for those things. That was their goal. They wanted to do that. However, Facebook, Instagram, any of these other, you know, Twitter, whatever, why should they be responsible to make sure that they're providing any particular type of news when really their purpose or their mission is to provide a social platform? Therefore, you as an adult should be engaging in these different social platforms, gathering information, so on and so forth, in the way that you want to, because you ultimately kind of decide your own path, and you ultimately decide what's important to you and how you want to seek out information. So what is your position, or where do you stand on that?
I think that would be true if there were no algorithms that provided information, if money wasn't involved over your head. I think that would be true if it was just a platform to put out thoughts and information. But when money changes hands, I think things change. But to answer your question about where are we going as a culture, I think that this generation may be one that seeks humanity. I mean, how often are people complaining about how the news is only bad news? Like, people don't watch the news because it's all negative. That's not true. If you watch the news, then you know that in editorial meetings we do have a huge emphasis on positive things, but that's at the local level again. So, but I do think that there's a thirst for humanity, for more neutral information, and for calming down on attacking other parties and other people. So I hope that that's what we'll see as far as a shift in culture.
So I'll definitely agree that I feel like our generation is one that is really seeking towards a more progressive outlook, which is incredible, like literally basic human rights, like you were saying. So how do you think that that aligns, kind of like, not necessarily stepping out of like a journalist perspective, just kind of like as just regular conversation, how do you think that works considering the leaders in our country right now and kind of like the thoughts and ideas that kind of play behind that? Because we did kind of have an entire switch from Obama to Trump.
I think that that's going to have a huge emphasis on this next election. I think if our generation who are now voting, we're 18, we're voting now, we're going to be the ones to make that change. So this midterm election is going to be a huge, huge impact on America. I mean, we could see the House change hands or the Senate change hands, and if it does, that's going to be incredible to see how we're going to be able to work going forward. And I think that our generation is going to be a main turning point in voting and seeing how the world is going to, how America is going to change. And I think that we have a voice now to reach out to humanity and, you know, push more people to go in a certain direction. And especially as a journalist, I have that ability to, you know, voice these people's opinions and how they feel on both sides of the aisle, and I love that I get to do that. So
I want to jump in here and play devil's advocate. There's an old rule of thumb among people who run political campaigns, and that is 18% of 18-year-olds vote, 30% of 30-year-olds vote, 70% of 70-year-olds vote. So the folks who are 70 who have this much longer view in their rear view mirror have a tendency to think about issues in ways that are going to be a little bit different than folks who are 18 or 25, but those folks who are 70 are going to turn out in much larger numbers. So if your cohort is going to even change topics of discussion about what should be, frankly, if I were you all, I would be raising Cain right now about the cost of student loans. And because that to me is a huge societal problem. There's data that indicates that people who are coming out of college are putting off buying a home for extended periods of time, or may even move home rather than take on a mortgage or other kinds of things. So, and actually, marriage rates among people who are graduating from college also, they tend to delay getting married. So there are a whole range of social issues that are coming into play, but that's largely because, frankly, 18% of 18-year-olds vote and 22% of 22-year-olds vote. So, plain devil's advocate, if you all do see a different set of issues that ought to be in public discussion, and then move away from things where we're exchanging insults to discussing issues that are going to be important to your generation, you need to get out and vote.
Voting the first time was a big deal.
Yeah.
When I turned 18, it was a big deal. My parents made sure I was registered, and it was a celebration. It was an honor and a responsibility, and I don't know, that doesn't seem to be the view anymore. And I don't know why. Why do you think voting is not as important?
I think it comes down to political efficacy and how much of an impact we think we have on society. You look at the previous election, and a lot of people didn't think that they had much of an impact after the result of that election, which would have happened both ways, regardless of who won that election. So, especially with us, I also feel like that filter that we have with social media and what we're taking in, we're missing out on a lot, and we're pretty impressionable as an age group. What's right and what's wrong, and what's actual news and what's not actual news. And so that's also influencing how much of an impact we have in politics. It kind of basically comes down to, well, we might still be kids. We don't really feel qualified to make these decisions, which is not good.
Is philosophy still a required undergraduate class?
Yeah.
Basic philosophy?
It's an option.
Yeah.
It's an option, see?
But there's an apathy that is there, yes. I mean, we have an outdated system relying on the electoral college business, which was initiated so many years back. But the numbers will eventually speak for themselves. As more and more younger people will participate in the democratic process, the numbers will then be able to create, of course, also create a discourse around it, that it is outdated. If each American vote counts, then it would be telling a different story as compared to relying on this representative system. And so recognizing those aspects about it, reporting on it, continuing, I think the persistence is important. And again, as my colleague said, participating in the democratic process, it's a privilege. I've just recently became a citizen May 11, 2018, after 24 years, nearly half my life. And I have to tell you that it's a privilege, and it's a power that you have, really, as we move forward, I hope.
If you don't vote, you have no say, and that's a given. If you vote, at least you put your hat in the ring. Keep doing it often enough, the tide will change.
I'm going to give then each of my panelists a final opportunity to express their thoughts about the topic of public discourse, maybe gaze into their crystal ball a little bit and see where that discussion might be going in the future. Who wants to be the first?
I think I'm going to be the optimistic person here. And I think things are not going to be like there forever. And things will change. But the way that it will change is we have to speak up. We have to act. We have to participate. We can't expect things to happen. We can't expect spoon feeding. We have to take some role in the responsibility of the circumstances and who we are and what we are in this situation right now. but I think change can definitely happen, and that's my message there.
And I will definitely agree, especially us as students at this age. We are the change that is happening. I think today is actually like National Voter Registration Day, if I believe. So I think you have until October 9th to register to vote, and I think that that's your first step if you're not registered. If you want to be the change, you have to sign up to be the change. And I also think that getting involved locally, you know, with your local politics, if you don't understand it at a national level, there's no better way to understand it than at a local level. So, you know, reaching out to, I'm sure half of you don't even know your state reps or your state senate. I mean, I encourage you to know who those people are, because they're actually probably making bigger impacts in our communities than the people nationally are. So if it's one piece of advice, I say register to vote and get involved locally.
It's where you have the most impact. And it's not enough to know who your representatives are. You need to have a relationship with them. They work for you. Go talk to them. Call them on the phone. Email them. Establish a relationship so you see them in public, you know who they are. It's not that hard. It really isn't. There aren't that many. It took me a long time to realize that those relationships were really, really, really important, that I needed to be able to pick up the phone and call. And they want to hear from you. Most of them really care about what they're doing. They're not bad people. And thank them, because they're in a very thankless position. People complain and whine at them constantly. And it's not like they're in it at the local level to get rich, because it's not going to happen. What I do think about going forward is that if you look at times of great change culturally throughout history, civil war, strife, violence, riots, I think our social media gives us an opportunity to usher in a less violent change. It gives us a platform if we use it in a positive and productive way. Now, I think we're still learning, still new, and I think the key is going to be you. You're the future. Start making your voice heard right now. Just do it in a respectful and humanitarian way, because ultimately it is. It's all about the people, right? Relationships, having the choices that we want to have, being able to live a happy, productive life, give back to society. So how do we go from where we are now to there?
I think one of the big themes that came out today also was context. If you're upset with the conversations that you're hearing and seeing, then learn the source and let that help you shape your opinions. And then we've talked a lot about social media and access. You have that access. Use it carefully. And if you're upset about maybe not having a voice that's heard, or feeling a little overwhelmed, if something along those lines came out over here, then not only contact local politicians, but you can use us too. Local news is a really cool resource because we only care about what's happening, and not only care about, but we care more about what's happening here than any other outlet's going to. So we can be a resource for you to either learn information or let your voice be heard, because we are listening. So that, again, is working for you. So feel free to reach out if you ever have any issues that you'd like to be addressed. We'd love to hear what you have to say.
All right, please, if you would, please join me in thanking our panelists for being here.
Okay, I'm Alice Worth, the chair of Diversity and Inclusion. This is our 9th annual year. And we have part of our panel members that are here that represent, and we come together to try to plan, talk about the latest issues that you guys are aware of. But anyway, I just want to get this distinguished panel. They did an excellent job. Also, I want to thank our key role players here, our skit players. And ladies and gentlemen, I want you to take your pamphlet and look over the things and opportunities that you have to go to without your class. Tonight, there's a panel form at 5:15 here. Tomorrow night in the auditorium, we will have student athletes speak on their perspective of being here at the university and dealing with some of the diversity issues and areas. And Friday, which is a free opportunity to come together to eat. And, Thursday. Yeah, we're through on Thursday. Thursday is the opportunity to come when we have our festival entertainment, music. We have the deans and directors. Dr. Haas did a great job, thank you, Dr. Haas. But he'll be there grilling burgers along with your directors. Music going, it's all free. Opportunity to hang out with your professors, talk, and play. Also, there's going to be a volleyball competition. Hannah asked me from PR, I think they still need some people to sign up to play volleyball. So if you are interested in playing volleyball, we're going to play against the schools and see which ones are going to be the Olympic winners. Competition and fun. So again, guys, thank you. One thing I want to say too, you are a privileged group to be in school. Being able to come together and listen to voices different than your own. Don't think about groupthink. What I heard today, research, educate, and vote. Thank you very much.
Thank you.